What's up, YouTube? So, YCS Dortmund is this weekend, and I'm here to show you guys the best decks you should be playing for YCS Dortmund, or what you should expect from YCS Dortmund. And the first deck here is Tier Limits. I think Tier Limits is a very, very strong deck. With a Rise Heart Band, this deck can just go crazy. You still have the Mill 5, you still have the Shufflers, and you still have the crazy tier monsters. Even though they're limited, you still have 3 Parallel Rhino, which OCG doesn't have. They have 3 Tier Limits Cast Tier, which is like one of the best Cast Tier monsters now, besides, you know, the limited ones. And then you still have 3 Scream, you still have 3 Soliac. Like, this deck is still crazy. And then your extra deck options are still very strong and versatile, like Rook Hallows, Collider Heart. If you want to go for non-tier limit monsters, you have Jerkus Depelia, Grapha. You still have Baron DeFleur, you still have Beatrice, which is still really insane. You have Abyss Dweller against the Mirror and Unchained. You still have Zeus, which is still a pretty powerful card. And then Cross Sheep and Sprint, they're very good extenders. And then you could also play the Bystials. The Bystials are definitely very good in the Mirror. They're also darks that you can make with Mud Dragon. And then for the side deck is pretty crazy. You could play this. Necro Banshee. You remember Flu format, or not Flu format, but you know what I mean. The tier format with Flu, and Flu was definitely the counter to this deck because they could play Shifter, and then the Flu cards were very insane. They still don't have Barrier Statue, by the way, but it's still a very strong matchup for them. So playing stuff like Necro Banshee that you could send off of Beatrice, and then search the Zombie World could be pretty strong. You can also mill it to the graveyard with stuff like, you know, Yugioh, Kelbeck, etc., etc. And then for the other side deck cards, you have Talons, you have XOT Encore. This card is really strong because not only does it check not only does it check purely, but it checks the Mirror because of, you know, Abyss Dweller is just a strong card in the Mirror. And then for the other side deck cards, Twin Twister, I think this is better than something like Lightning Storm or Cosmic because it deals with something like Flu, which, you know, map is pretty insane, as well as the Trap card, which is really good. So I think these are like the best options. Maybe you could change like Talents to something else, maybe something like Droplet or something like that. But I think this is pretty powerful. And then because a lot of people are going to question this, why am I playing 3 Metanoids and not like 1 or 0? I think this is one of the better mills in the deck. I feel like a lot of people look at this card and they're like, oh, well, this is bad. You should play the Mali stuff, or you should play like the Shadal stuff. But the problem with the Shadal and the Mali stuff, or any other mill cards you can play, is that they're bad to draw, right? Or they're either bad to draw or bad to mill. So I think this is pretty like good to draw and good to mill. So I think these are like the better cards you should play in your deck. And with Beach King of the Swamp, yes, you can play Poly, but that's like a dead card, and if you mill it, like, your King of the Swamp is dead. So you might as well just play like Beast King of the Swamp, have another extra spot for stuff like Abyss Dweller, Baguska, you know, etc., etc. So that is it for tier. The next deck is pretty self-explanatory. I think this is the second or third best deck to play, which is Purely. Purely's pretty insane. A lot of people are going to be dropping the books. At least the players that don't respect Purely. But when you're playing against the Purely Mirror, or you're playing against a lot of different decks, I think Book of Eclipse and Book of Moon are still pretty decent options to play in your main deck. And then stuff like Nibiru and Perm Ash are pretty good. I like Castier Fenrir. I know a lot of people don't play Fenrir in their Purely build, but I think that Fenrir is pretty strong. The only problem with Fenrir is if people main deck Droll at this event, or a few weeks before, you know, Agoth comes out. I think that Fenrir is just pretty strong because a lot of people are just not going to be playing Droll. And then for the side deck, it's pretty standard. Cross out for D-Barrier, as well as, you know, Ash and Perm, and Droll and Lockbird. And then the extra deck is just pretty standard. This is just pretty standard, Purely list. Can't really go wrong with this. I think it's pretty strong, very skill heavy. So yeah, definitely a strong option. And then the next deck is Fluunderies. Yes, Fluunderies is a deck that's very powerful, but you're going to have to make a few changes. I don't think Thrust is going to be that strong of an option. I feel like a lot of people are going to be switching to, like, if not, they're going to be playing less hand traps, but I feel like they're going to be playing stuff like Thrust and Talent. So stuff like that is not really good if your opponent just doesn't play hand traps. So I would say you might as well just play stuff like Book of Eclipse, Book of Moon, which are pretty strong in this deck alone. Like, you don't even care about like other matchups, but I think these cards are just very strong to dodge stuff like Imperm or Baylor. And then on top of that, I think Eclipse and Book of Moon are really good in the purely matchup, which could be pretty hard to deal with. So I think that these are pretty strong options as well, you know, Unchained, you know, etc., etc. These could be pretty strong to stop that. As well as, you know, Bagooska. Bagooska is very, very strong against your deck. So stuff like Book of Moon and Book of Eclipse can help against those cards. And then obviously Dimension Shifter is like pretty insane. I'm not sure if the person that won the event main deck Shifter or the other players that played Fluor Underease at the past couple events played Shifter, but I think main deck Shifter is definitely mandatory. And then we go to the side deck, we're playing Ash Draw. I think these are like the most standard hand traps aside. If you're not playing that many hand traps, I think these are like the strongest standalone cards because Ash deals with stuff like, you know, diffusion decks like Branded and Chimera, and then trap decks like Fluundereeze. Well, Fluundereeze is not a trap deck, but you get what I mean. The more control decks like Fluundereeze, Labyrinth, any other deck that just control or, you know, stun or whatever, Ash is pretty good against. And then Talents in the side deck, or Thrust in the side deck, this is pretty strong. You have options like Featherstorm and Featherstorm and Harpy's Feather Duster, as well as Herald of the Abyss to out the War, which is pretty strong. So these are definitely strong options you can play. Moving on to the next deck, Labyrinth. Now this is a different spin on Labyrinth that a lot of people haven't really explored with recently, and that is the Trap Floodgate Labyrinth. I feel like this is the best option when it comes to Labyrinth. Even though I don't think Labyrinth is the best choice for this event, I think it's pretty bad because it just has a horrible Unchained matchup. But with a lot of these main deck cards, you do have a better time against Unchained, and then your matchups against other decks should be fairly strong. I'd say like the Shifter and stuff like the Ice Dragon Prison as well as the Goza match can help you in your bad matchup like Tier and Unchained. And then you have stuff like Skill Drain, you know, Stride, Compulse, all these other like generically strong trap cards, as well as the strong Labyrinth engine that can help you. And then Chaos Angel, obviously one of the strongest extra deck monsters in the Labyrinth deck, as well as Muckraker. And then for the side deck, again, Ash, Droll, you see these are pretty standard against stuff like, you know, again, Fluundereeze, the Mirror. Droll is good against a lot of decks that add, like Vanadium or Infernobles that are like really scary for your deck. And then again, for those combo decks, you have Lava Golem. Going first, you have Summon Limit, which can help you again against the Unchained or Tier Limit matchup. And then Eradicator can help in the Mirror, as well as other matchups can be pretty strong. And then Solemn Judgment to round off the side deck, and then the other extra deck cards don't really matter. But I do feel like the Floodgate Labyrinth is the best way to go if you're going to play Labyrinth at this event. Another deck that I think that people are going to underestimate is Kashtira. It could be pure, it could be punk, but I think the more, I'd say, brainless, you know, anti-meta option is, you know, standard Kashtira, but with a lot of anti-meta options like Dimension Shifter. There can only be one. These cards are just very powerful in the meta, so I think these are pretty strong cards to play in combination with the Kashtira monsters. And then you have generic cards like Nibiru, Imperm, Ash. I think Veiler is like probably the next best hand trap, if not stuff like DD Pro, Skullmeister, you know, etc. etc. I think these are pretty strong options. You also could play Bystios if you wanted, like Druid Swarm can be here, but I don't like Druid Swarm. I think it's pretty bad. But you don't want to like clog your hand with like too much stuff that can summon before your turn, like Nibiru. So I just think they're pretty bad. I think Nibiru is just too strong not to play. We're gonna play a lot of hand traps. And then for the extra deck, it's like pretty standard. You just play a lot of rank 7s or like options you can make in case they come up. And then side deck Droll, I think this is like one of the better hand traps to side deck in this format. And then Inscription, this can be a very strong option as well as in this deck you can play this as well. So I think Inscription is going to be very powerful now because it not only hits Unchained, but it hits Tier Limits as well. Then you have back row hate like Lightning Storm, Evenly Match, and then you have the side deck Solemn Judgment to stop stuff like blowouts, to get rid of stuff like There Can Only Be One, or just anything else. It could also be Anti-Spell Fragrance, which could be pretty powerful against a lot of spell-heavy decks, but I think Judgment is just better, and it doesn't conflict with your Kashtira monsters or spell cards. The next option is Rescue Ace. I didn't have a deck built for it, but I think this is pretty standard. I mean, I don't think much changes. Maybe like the staple cards, but I feel like they're pretty straightforward. I mean, Ash, Nibiru, Imperm, you can probably change the books to something else. Maybe like Eclipse or like a DD Crow or something like that could be pretty good. Besides that, I mean, this is pretty standard. Maybe change Econs for something else as well. I think everything else looks pretty fine. Like, you can keep Talents, keep Lightning Storms. The Harpy's Feather Dust, their Bystios are still pretty strong. You gotta cut down on the Magnemites because they're obviously at 1. But I think this is pretty standard. This is the YCS top 16 Vancouver list. So I think this is pretty strong. And the list, I think, is, if you're playing Unchained, this is pretty boring, but like, I don't think much changes. You can still keep the Book of Eclipse because I think Book of Eclipse is still pretty decent. Otherwise, it could be something else. Maybe like more talents. Maybe, you know, maybe DD Crow or something like that. Maybe Ash. Maybe Imperm. Just depends. Side deck is still pretty decent. I don't think you need to change it. Extra still the same. I think Unchained is still a very strong option. Probably one of your stronger options, if not the best option you can play at this YCS, because it's just very powerful, very standard, and has a very high skill gap. Same thing with something like Purely. Next deck is Dragon Link. Dragon Link, it did take a few hits. You see the 3 Bestial Magnemite and the Chaos Base. You're obviously going to have to cut down on these two, but overall, I think this is pretty standard. You're probably going to play the same list, minus the Chaos Bases and the Magnemite. I think these are pretty strong. Side deck and extra deck, probably still the same. Maybe take out the Book of Eclipse, but I still think Book of Eclipse, again, is pretty strong against Purely and a lot of other matchups. And then for the last deck, I think that is pretty strong, but probably one of my lesser picks. Stuff like Labyrinth and this are probably lower on my radar, but still pretty powerful, is the Chimera branded deck. I think this is pretty powerful because once this deck get going, it's like pretty hard to beat. It does have a decent Unchained matchup as well. Don't know how good it is against the tier limit strategy as well as the Flu. Doesn't seem like a really good Flu matchup, but I don't know, maybe it could be good, but I still think this deck is pretty powerful. Again, you have stuff like, you know, Super Poly, pretty good in this deck because you just have a lot of extra deck spots for stuff like Mud Dragon, Garura, Draco's Rebellia, which is really good against stuff like Tier. And then you have Ash Blossom, you have, you know, all these other hand traps that can be pretty good. Again, you can change these for like different cards, like whatever you see fit, Nib, or, you know, Book of Eclipse, etc., etc. You can play those over those cards. And then the extra deck and side deck are pretty standard. I mean, you don't really need anything else when it comes to this deck. So these are all the options. I think these are all pretty good if you're going to YCS Dortmund or you're playing any events before Age of Overlord. And yeah, let me know what you guys think about all these lists. Maybe I should change a few things about these lists. Maybe you think that something else is pretty strong at this event. Just let me know in the comment section below, and I'll be out. Peace.